How's it going? Awesome. Kia ora and welcome everyone to our session on AI-powered assistants and how they are changing the game for developer experience. My name is Seb Kruger. I'm beaming in via video link from the beautiful evening in Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington. I work at Sourced in the Cloud CTO office, and I lead a group of cloud technology specialists building out prototypes solving cloud adoption problems across migrations, platforms, and security spaces. Look, today is a hybrid event. We've got a team in Auckland who are actually watching this live in person via a Google Hangout, but we are also streaming this via LinkedIn and YouTube. So this is a bit of a first in quite a while. We used to do this during COVID times, but now this is a bit of a reboot on a whole new format. So pretty excited to try out this new setup. So fingers crossed it all works well. Getika, I'm just checking if I'm coming loud and clearly through in Auckland. Fantastic. All right, well, let's get right into it. So I want to just kick off with a karakia, and a karakia are Maori prayers and incantations. They're generally used to ensure a favorable outcome to an important event, such as at an AWS user group, Aotearoa Hui, like this evening. And I've added the English translation for you to read along as well, in case your te reo is a little bit rusty. So here goes. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mākina kina ki uta, kia mātaratara ki tai, e hi ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei Māori ora. Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to cover a quick Community Day spotlight. We'll dig into the industry trends that are shaping the AI coding assistants, which is, of course, what you're here for today, and we're going to dig into some really cool data points. I'll give a quick demo of Amazon CodeWhisperer and, of course, also GitHub CoPilot, and we'll be doing a Q&A at the end as well. So excited to kick this off. Now, just, I guess, a little bit of a background. So AWS has been quite a central theme in my career for quite a few years. And I was lucky enough to be one of the founding members of the Wellington AWS community and have been part of the leadership there from right at the beginning, of course. It didn't take long for other AWS communities to be set up, and we now have communities in Christchurch, Wellington, and Auckland. And soon we'll also have an AWS community in Whangarei, so watch this space. It's currently being set up. Now, as the Wellington community expanded and matured, myself and a few of my AWS community friends across Aotearoa started searching for a truly independent identity for the AWS community with a vision of an open and inclusive space for all AWS communities to come together. And so in the center here, you see the brand of the nationwide AWS community. And we have a website at awsug.nz, so make sure you go check it out. If you're not aware of it, I'm really keen to point that out to you. It's always been a dream of us to run an annual conference for all of us to come together and celebrate another year of amazing AWS developments. So, and this year, we're very proud to be able to host the AWS Community Day Aotearoa for 2023 in beautiful Te Whanganui-a-Tara, Wellington on September 6th. So I want to tell you a little bit about the event before I kick off into our main topic. We've got a passionate group of volunteers who have come together to make this event a reality. All of these amazing humans are working really hard to make the event a roaring success for the whole AWS community across New Zealand. And we have committee members from Christchurch and Wellington and Auckland. And it's really awesome to see, you know, communities across all of New Zealand coming together to form a committee to make this event reality. Of course, an event is expensive to run, and so we're very thankful to our sponsors. At the gold tier, we've got the CyberCX and AWS, so mega thanks to both of them. Silver sponsors are Aquasec, CMD, Init Solutions, Ingram Micro, and Sourced, where I work. And so massive thank you for making this event possible. All of these companies truly understand the power of community, and we've even had a couple of supporters come through. So the IBIS in Wellington is giving a special discount for the event, and the Singapore AWS user group donated the website code to bootstrap our website. So we want to make sure that we say thanks to our supporters as well as our sponsors. Initial speakers have been announced, but we're getting new submissions almost daily. In fact, today is actually the last day that you can submit a call for papers if you're keen to talk. So you've got till midnight before the form auto closes down. We've had 35 speaker submissions, which has been absolutely incredible. So we're weeding our way through these submissions today. Certainly the intention is to make sure that everyone who's submitted a talk is hopefully able to talk, of course. So we're quite excited about this. So keynoting, we have got Peter Spassky, who's co-founder at Hearthands AI and of course of our Cloud Guru fame. And we have Shafraz Rahim, who leads the developer community across APJ at AWS, coming in from Singapore. So pretty exciting times. So a shameless plug, of course, for the inaugural AWS Community Day. You can still get your tickets. Go head to the website. Make sure you don't miss out. Tickets are only 25 New Zealand dollars. There's also the Cloud Native Days, which is happening the day before this. So you've got the opportunity to come and attend 2 conferences in Wellington in the same week. All right, so let's get to the actual presentation topic that you all came for today. First, I did this talk in March of this year, and my intention was to create a talk about a hot topic that was going to be fun for both myself and my audience to explore in great detail. And then the theory was that if it went well, I would give that talk again in a different region across New Zealand. Well, now it's almost August, and as I went through and reviewed this content, I realized that I had to pretty much rewrite my whole presentation because so much had moved on in this space in just a few months, and I am certain that it will just get even more active in this space. So how do we identify the mega trends in any area anyway? And maybe a radical point of view is if you can't measure it, then maybe it never happened, or at least you have no evidence that it happened. So maybe it's just your imagination. So searching for data points on AI coding assistants turned out to be relatively straightforward, actually. However, building out a well-structured narrative took some time. And if anything, it's actually data overload, and it can be hard to identify the signal from the noise at times. Stack Overflow developer survey from May 2023. It's only a couple of weeks old. It wasn't available when I was doing this talk in March. So now we have lots of data points around AI coding assistants. And when I did this last time, I didn't have this data. So I just went with what I basically observed in the market myself. But now we've actually got proper data points. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes going through these findings as they're very interesting indeed. But I wanted to not only show you the data that other organizations have collected, such as Stack Overflow, but actually collect some live data right here at this meetup from all of you. So I did say on the various different social media forums that I posted this talk on that it was going to be interactive, and I want all of you to participate in this presentation. So make sure you get your phones out, go to this QR code, or go to the URL and type in the passcode. If you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, I'm monitoring the chats in there as well, and we've got the lovely Susanna monitoring the chats in there as well. So make sure to use Pigeonhole as well. So I'll just give you a quick second to make sure that you log in on that one. All right, so for the live viewers on the stream, actually what I found I can do is I can beam in a QR code. So I'm going to try this out. Let me see if this works. Okay, hopefully that works. Okay, so you should be able to see a QR code in the top left corner. All right, now once you've entered this QR code, Getika, do you want to confirm that everyone in the Auckland in-person office has managed to do this? They are muted. So we've got a bit of a feedback loop challenge. But I'm going to assume that you guys all got in. And so what you should see is, oops, hang on, let me click on the correct link. So what you should see is this. So what I would like you to do is to go through the warm-up questions, just only for now. Take a minute or two to complete the warm-up questions. There's actually only 6 questions. You'll also see the Ask Me Anything session. And at any point in time, you're able to submit a question that comes to mind. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session. You can just submit a question right away. And I'll do my best to work through the questions through the Q&A session. So yeah, cool. I'll just give you guys a couple of minutes to work through these questions here. And then we'll go through and we'll review the results. Okay, so here's the QR code, and let's give it a minute, shall we? Cool, so it's 5:41, do it at 5:42. Getika, do let me know if everything's going smoothly in the Auckland venue. Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to move on, even though I haven't heard from the amazing folks in Auckland, but fingers crossed things are still moving forward. So this is the projector panel that we're supposed to be able to show with all of the cool results. So let's have a little bit of a look-see. So how long have you been using AWS professionally? These are just our initial 1 or 2 or 3 warm-up questions that we got. And pretty interesting, less than 1 year. It's the dominant number here. So clearly that's something. We do have a couple of veterans, 10 to 14. That is amazing. You know, I actually stopped it at 14 because I think that's how old AWS actually is. But I thought it would be funny to put like 20 in there and see how many people choose that, almost as like a calibration sort of question. All right, let's get the next one. How many AWS certifications have you got? All right, a lot of people have 1 certification. A couple have 2 to 4, 5 to 6, and there are no golden jackets in the room today. What else we got? Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. Have you used AI-based coding assistants before? Most of you have actually not, but plan to. And almost half of you have said yes to that, and a whole bunch also have no intention to use these. And fascinatingly enough, you have come to a talk on AI-based coding assistants that you have no intention of using. So congratulations to you for making it to this talk anyway. All right, does your boss know you are using AI-based coding assistants for work? This one is going to be pretty interesting. See, there's always a couple that answer no to this one. A lot of you said you don't use them for work. 45% have said yes, that you use them at work. That's, I think, the 45%. It's a really encouraging number. It probably reflects what we're going to see shortly in the Stack Overflow responses as well. All right, we've got 2 more questions. Does employer have a policy around AI-based coding assistants? Oh, the Y has disappeared, but it was supposed to say yes, and it's allowed. 16% yes, and it's forbidden 6%. That's interesting. And most of you have said no. And again, I think that is probably reflective of what we were expecting to see, but pretty interesting statistics anyway. So the interesting thing is that you have no, there's a lot of people who have no policy but are using it anyway, because 43% of us have said that it is actually, so said there's no policy or it's allowed. Okay, cool. Last question. Have you used any of the following AI coding assistants? Of course, a third of you have said that you don't use them. My guess is that at the end of this talk, you might well be using them actually. None of you use Tab9. That's an interesting one. We'll get into that one shortly. Most people use GitHub CoPilot, no surprise there, and only a couple of you are using CodeWhisperer. I'm going to do a demo of CodeWhisperer, so I hope that you're going to see that CodeWhisperer has quite a few really cool features as well. All right, Cool. So let's get back to the presentation and dive into this a little bit deeper. Getek, I can hear you in the background. Everything good in Auckland? Fantastic. All right, cool. So now this is the results from the Stack Overflow developer survey. And have you ever used AI-based coding assistants before? And we have got quite similar statistics. We've got quite a few who've said yes. Of course, most of them no, but I plan to soon. Interesting enough, we had only very few, I think maybe one or two people have said that they don't plan to. But reasonably similar statistics. So I guess what that suggests is that we're a similar demographic probably to what has submitted to the developer survey here. So I thought this one was quite interesting as well. Have you used any of the following AI coding assistants before? Github CoPilot, massive, right up front. But the second one was tab 9. And I noticed no one in our audience today has used tab 9. In fact, some of you might not even know tab 9. So I'll just briefly tell you that it exists and what it does. So essentially, tab 9 can be locally adapted to your code base. So your organization's private code base and any private knowledge base without exposing any of your code. And it combines essentially that knowledge with your own coding styles and those best practices. So that means that when the code recommendations come through, they're actually done in the particular way that suits your organization's coding style, assuming you have one. I'm an old school Java developer from way back in the day, and we used to have all sorts of linting and what have you to ensure that you couldn't actually push any code into, back then it was Subversion repositories without having the correct structures. So the whole idea is that it keeps code private, make sure that nothing goes into any potential machine learning algorithms and gets reusing the code for anyone else. So we see CodeWhisperer is at 5%, not a lot compared to the top, and probably reflective of what we saw just now on our statistics. But you'll see shortly that CodeWhisperer has quite a few really cool features as well. All right, so now CodeWhisperer is so low in statistics, so I figured, hey, we're at an AWS meetup. This is the AWS community. We got to dig in and find out, well, what are actually some results separately to only the AI side that really stand out for AWS. And what we can see here is that AWS is used much more than the competitors overall by quite a large margin. And I don't know if that just means that if you're using AWS, you're on Stack Overflow, and otherwise you're not. But assuming that this is a holistic data set or sample set across the whole industry, then these are certainly quite telling platforms. So if you're here at an AWS community event, you're probably at the right event and you're doing the right thing for your career. So I'm sorry, this graph might be a little bit too much, or hopefully it can be seen, but I'll try to describe this. So what you see is blue, which is desired. So those are people who want to use it, and red is admired, which is continue to use next year. So the question is, which cloud platform have you done extensive dev work in over the past year, and which do you want to work in over the next year? And what we can see here is that AWS is actually way more desired than any other cloud platform. But at the end of the day, this hopefully shouldn't be a surprise based on the last question, which showed that twice the number of people are using AWS over Azure. So that doesn't necessarily mean one's better than the other, of course, but it certainly means that it's far more popular. But AWS has a little bit more of a margin on the admired red dot over Azure as well, which would suggest that a lot of people that are using AWS now, are maybe looking to use Azure at a later point as well. So could this data point maybe suggest that cloud professionals are now becoming multi-cloud professionals across Azure and AWS simultaneously? That's something, as I was looking at this, I was thinking about that. Maybe that's kind of one of the industry trends. But we know for sure AWS being used quite a bit more than Azure, according to this survey result, at least. Okay, so back to the AI developer tools. So GitHub CoPilot, way more desired and admired than anything else. One might even say it is off the charts. Look at that in the top right corner here. We also see that Copilot has more people who want to use it, which is the blue bit, than are currently using it, which is the red bit. So those of you that have said that you're not yet using, but intending to use, probably you intend to use GitHub Copilot. That's essentially what this statistic is suggesting, right? But it could also suggest that Copilot is in a bit of a major hype phase right now. Obviously significantly leading the market, but we can probably assume that this is going to normalize in quite near future. Okay, so it's also important to take a look at the IDE market. And clearly, VS Code is by far the most popular. No real surprise there, because no doubt most people that are listening in on a talk today are, of course, using VS Code as well. But of course, as we think about AI coding assistant and the tooling in that space, the vendors will definitely focus on VS Code first. One might even suggest it's a must-have in order to be a player in this space. So one thing that I thought was pretty cool, though, is to see down the bottom there, NeoVim is in there as well, with GitHub Copilot support for NeoVim. If you're into Vim and if you're into doing stuff in the console, you can even, do some pretty hefty, advanced IDE coding right inside the terminal. So pretty cool. I've experimented with a little bit and found it was quite a lot of fun to explore. Okay, let's get a little bit more interactive again. I would like to know, how do you feel about AI at the moment? And so I would like you to go through and do the AI sentiment reality check. And one of the cool things I found when I was looking at how to build some engagement for this talk, which is the first time I'm using the Pigeonhole Live tool here, I found it can do a word cloud. And I thought, gosh, wouldn't that be cool to try this out? So let's have a look what that looks like. So how do I do this? I go back again. Okay, what have we got? What single word comes to mind when you think about the future of AI? Exciting, that's certainly me as well. And I think that stands out. We've got ChatGPT. Oh, we've got some really good ones. We've got rebellion, agency, speed and agility, utility. ChatGPT is getting major boost right now. Uncertainty, yes. Unprecedented. I would agree with that as well. I think that we're at the cusp of something that's changing the game so drastically. And, it's up to us to debate if that's good or not, but it's happening regardless, and we definitely cannot stop that. What else is changing on here? Possibilities, very positive. And I like that. I think the most important thing here is to, of course, stay really, really positive about this. And I think the more positive thoughts we have about this, the more we're able to influence this into a positive direction as well. So avoiding all of that sort of like existentialist challenging there. Wow. Okay. More's coming through. It's pretty exciting. Now, I better move the talk along because I want to make sure that we've got time for demo as well. But it's pretty cool to test out this and see what it's like. It's overall, I'm going to say that it's positive. I think exciting stands out, and I think that's amazing. And opportunities. And there's only just almost like just a hint of like, oh, uncertainty could be a bit disconcerting, but overall positive. Okay, so let's see what the AI tool sentiment came through on the Stack Overflow dev survey. And we've got 61,000 responses. So in this case, I think we only had maybe 35 responses, but here's 61,000. And you can see there's, of course, a couple that are very unfavorable. Well, maybe those are sort of the laggards. But in general, we can see the huge lion's share is favorable. The next biggest one is very favorable, and a couple are indifferent. I think I'm personally somewhere between favorable and indifferent, but it is happening, and there's no stopping this snowball from anything. So Let's dive deeper into these tools. So first up, let's look at Amazon CodeWhisperer. We're at an AWS community meetup, so of course we got to start with our own tooling. So which programming languages and IDEs does CodeWhisperer actually support? And the major ones that you see here, it's of course Python, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, C#, but also the ones that you don't see here is the kind of the standard ones that you'd expect. So Go, Rust, PHP, Ruby, Kotlin, C, C++, even shell scripting, some SQL as well, and Scala. So the thing that makes CodeWhisperer stand out from CoPilot, I think, is the native integration, meaning out of the box with AWS Cloud9, the AWS Lambda console, Amazon SageMaker Studio, and Jupyter Lab. And all of those, you do not get those with GitHub Copilot or any of the other ones because, of course, it's a native AWS web console. They're only going to support their own tooling, and it's going to be very difficult for anyone else to enter that space. But of course, something that I reflected on when I thought about this was that, you should be using infrastructure as code and, any kind of good DevSecOps practices. So if you're using, Cloud9 for any serious coding, that's cool. That's a full IDE, but I, to be honest, don't see too many people doing that at extreme levels. But, maybe I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you start using AWS Lambda console for heavy production code. But hey, maybe you do. All right, so of course we do want to know, what does this cost? It's actually been GA since April 2023. Now, a major difference between the free tier and the paid version is how to authenticate to the professional tier CodeWhisperer APIs. So the pro tier has the option to use the AWS single sign-on service, whereas the free tier is a builder ID, which is like a non-AWS account identity that essentially anyone can register for, but it's quite separate from any other ID. So you can certainly manage who can and can't use it with your corporate AWS account creds if you go with the professional one. But since everyone can largely just use their personal builder ID, staff can relatively easily, in a way, circumvent that restriction. So there'll be some other ways that, if we have time, we can talk about of how organizations can sort of restrict access to this, beyond builder ID being just the default for everyone. Now, of course, for the AWS Web Console native integration, this does appear to work regardless of being pro tier or not, or if you're on the individual free tier, I guess that's just the one that they support regardless. Then now the key items to point out finally with the pro tier, though, you can turn off the code suggestions that are similar to open source code. And I'm going to show you in a bit of a demo on how that works. And you have got no collection of code artifacts for service improvements. This is like a really common objection that I hear quite a lot. And there's actually like a lot of disinformation out there that is like, oh no, we could never possibly use any of these coding assistants because we're going to share our private source code with Microsoft or Amazon or any of the other alternatives out there. And that's actually plain and simply not true. It is features that you can turn off, so you do not share that. But in the free tier, you got to explicitly opt out. And so we can probably safely assume that most people will forget or not even be aware of this setting. So if your organization values that, which you should, then probably the professional tier is your real only option here. All right, so why should you care? Now, from the research that I've done, the big thing here is that CodeWhisperer is optimized for use with AWS services. So in theory, AWS can build coding assistant that specifically knows about AWS best practices, like the well-architected framework and the cloud adoption framework and all of the prescriptive guidance out there. And I noticed, obviously we saw in the first question, a lot of you are relatively new to AWS and have been using it for less than a year even. And so certainly as you go through your own AWS professional career journey, make sure that you check out the well-architected framework and the cloud adoption framework. And there's so much prescriptive guidance out there. So, of course, in practice, this is available to everyone freely. So all of the competitors could also index this and bring it into the ChatGPT kind of OpenAI models. But one can safely assume that AWS is specifically motivated to do a really good job with that. So I think we're going to see that benefit expand in the future. There's a note here on bias avoidance, which is quite an interesting one, which means that it will filter out code suggestions that might be considered biased and unfair. Now, as it's filtered out, you'll actually never know if it was there in the first place. So I don't know. That one's a little bit hard. You can't prove it. You can't test it. I guess maybe if you spot biased code, but you'd have to be trained to spot that. So that one's a bit of a peculiar one. Like my personal sort of little wee prediction that I'm, I guess, putting on record here is that CodeWhisperer will definitely be used in the AWS Web Console editors, obviously, including Cloud9. However, as I mentioned earlier, one might actually consider using these editors as sort of click ops and certainly not worthy of serious production code editing. Now, it's free, so if you're too frugal to use more popular commercial alternatives, why not use it, And if it's free, then essentially there's major kind of upside on it, really. Okay, let me quickly check the time. We have got a little bit of time left. Cool. Okay, so next up, let's do the same kind of thing for GitHub CoPilot, and then we'll dig into a bit of a demo and the Q&A. All right, so again, same thing. Which programming languages and IDEs does GitHub CoPilot support? It integrates with multiple IDEs, including the JetBrains, VS Code, of course, Visual Studio, NeoVim. Again, that's the really cool one. Go check it out. Makes Vim on steroids. Pretty heavy, awesome. Works on any language, they say. So they don't just list the languages. They just say any language, including Java, PHP, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, Go, C# or C++. But it comes down to how much training data is available. So the most popular languages that you find in the open source repositories on GitHub, those are going to give you the best results when you try and generate code. If you're trying to generate code for some really obscure language, I don't know, maybe, I used to say Lua, but actually Lua is becoming more popular now. But if you're on a bizarre, obscure language that no one else is using, then there's just not going to be a lot of training data. So you're not going to get very good results. So keep that in mind as you're thinking of using the tools. So how much does GitHub CoPilot cost? This one's kind of important to know as well. There's no free version. Unlike CodeWhisperer, you can use CodeWhisperer for free. GitHub CoPilot is not for free. So $10 per month or $100 per year. Depending on the exchange rate to New Zealand dollars, that can be a bit of an injury every month. But hey, it may well be worth your improved coding experience if you believe in it and want to stay at the forefront of what's happening here. The business license is not much more at $20 per month per license. Okay, so similar discussion here. What are the main business tier differences? Same as with CodeWhisperer, there's no collection of code artifacts for service improvements, but the individual tier actually does call out that you have to, again, explicitly opt out. So by default, it's going to scan, absolutely everything right away. So there's the usual license and policy management features. But then there's also this one down the bottom here, which is specifically called out in the documentation, which is a proxy usage via the VPN support. So you can use CoPilot if your repositories can only be accessed with a corporate VPN connection. This, by the way, is also the best way to prevent staff from using any of the AI coding assistants in a corporate sort of SOE, standard operating environment setup. For example, I can only access, like at my work, our corporate Bitbucket repositories if I'm on the company VPN. And once the VPN's turned on, then all traffic must go via the proxy, and the proxy just blocks the CoPilot APIs or the CodeWhisperer APIs or any of those that the corporate overlords don't like. So, of course, there's plenty of corporate spyware also that you should be aware of. I mean, security monitoring agents on the corporate workstation these days. So if you think your boss doesn't know that you're using these tools, you might want to think twice, because I'm pretty sure he or she will know. Okay, cool. Let's get to the demo. Now, I am going to just share a different screen, and because I've got my Google Hangout going to the Auckland crowd and the live stream on a different tool, I'm just going to quickly switch this over. Cool. All right. So that's that one done, and now I will do the next one. Okay. So the both of the live streams should be updated now. Okay. So first, we're going to go through and have a look at CodeWhisperer. So I'm in VS Code. I have got some demo apps, sort of demo Python scripts prepared to show you the various different features. And first off, I just want to show you where you can install it from. So you go to extensions, you go to the AWS toolkit, this one right here. You install the toolkit, and then you have VS Code. Sorry, then you have CodeWhisperer right out of the box. Okay, so pretty straightforward to install. Now, then you get this little wee icon on the bottom here. If you're pros, this is nothing new for you. But otherwise, if you're not using this plugin and you're using AWS, then you must get this installed, definitely. Okay, so this gives you down here, hopefully this is coming through properly. You get these developer tools on the bottom here, and you can see there's I'm connected with the AWS Builder ID, because I don't have a pro subscription. I've just got my own personal subscription, which I use for Builder ID. And the Builder ID is used for Code Catalyst and for CodeWhisperer. And now Code Catalyst is a different session, and we're not going to cover that today. But if you want to, if you've got a Builder ID, you can use it for both of those. And you can see I've got, for CodeWhisperer, I have got my AWS Builder ID connected already. Now, I've actually found it's quite useful if we just take that and we drag it over to the other side. And then it makes everything a little bit easier, because I've got my Explorer on one side and I've got my developer tools and my AWS Explorer, if I was to have it connected, which I don't right now. Yep. How about that? Will that work? Is that better? If I make it much more, there won't be a lot of room for the code anymore, but let's see how we go. Hopefully, I mean, I think this is probably as good as I can get it. It's dark. Sorry, I like the dark theme. I find it easier on the eyes. If you're, I don't know. That's maybe just a personal preference, but I do have the dark theme going. So hopefully it's coming through. I have increased the size, and I hope that you can see this properly now. Okay, so we have got a couple of features down the bottom here. Now, because I also have GitHub CoPilot, you can see this CoPilot plugin is installed down here. I have disabled the CoPilot. So you can see it's asking if I want to enable it. Of course, I don't. So I can pause the auto suggestion. So as I'm coding, it'll automatically make suggestions, and I can turn that off by just pausing it. And if I pause it, I can then turn on GitHub CoPilot, and there's not going to be any weird sort of conflicts, right? But we're going to have this turned on. There's security scans that I can run. The security scans is where CoPilot goes and sends the code that we've got on the screen, which I'll open up shortly, and it sends it through into what is it called? It's called the AWS Code Guru, and it goes and does a scan. So, for example, here I've got some code. Let me see, hopefully this is coming through. So here we've got a little bit of code. It's called log credentials. That seems like a pretty bad thing to do, right? So hopefully when we run a security scan on this, it's going to say, oh, that's not good. You definitely do not want to log your access key and your secret key. That's like a big ass no-no. And we've got this other one, authenticate on subscribe. Essentially, the main one here is that we send a confirmed subscription, and there's some authentication happening down here as well. Looks complicated, but all correct. But let's see what it does over these two things. At the very minimum, we should see log credentials throwing some pretty heavy errors here. All right, so let's go and run the CodeWhisperer security scan. All right, so we can see down the bottom, it's scanning the active file and its dependencies. Takes a wee bit. By the way, on the free tier, you get 50 scans a month, I think it was. Whereas on the professional tier, you get 500 scans a month. So you probably want to be a bit of frugal on this one. Okay, cool. So apparently there's no problem on the secret key, just on the access key. And it says AWS credentials logged, unencrypted AWS credentials are logged. This could expose those credentials to an attacker. Obviously, fantastic. It is detected that this is a really big oopsie. And to solve it, we are just going to delete this whole thing. There we actually, and we'll keep it, but we'll comment it out. And then there's something down here as well. What's this all about? It goes and says unauthenticated Amazon SNS unsubscribe request. Now, I didn't even know about this. In theory, of course, I ran this demo before, but in theory, I wouldn't have known about this. So, and it tells us that we have failed to set the authenticate on unsubscribe flag to true when confirming an SNS subscription, and it causes all unsubscribe requests to succeed. So what we could do to solve that is add that down the bottom. Now, sometimes the auto suggestions work, sometimes they don't. So if you want to trigger CodeWhisperer directly, what you do is you just do Option C. Now you can't see that, but I'm pressing Option C, and it doesn't always work clearly. So what it was supposed to show is that it's going to autocomplete the code, but it didn't. So we're going to, oopsie. You know what? I think it might actually be the fact that it's gone all, here we go. We want to have this, and it has to be true. All right, so then we will run our security scan again, and we'll make sure that the errors go away. Now, actually, what I was going to show is also that it shows up in the problems space down the bottom here. So every time the security scan detects something, then they're going to show up down here in the problems as well. Okay, cool. Our problems are gone. CodeWhisperer has detected their security issues, and we have rectified them, and everything's sweet. Now, there's also this open code reference log here. And what that does is that when CodeWhisperer recommends code for you, it goes and says, oh, this code came from this repository, this code came from that repository, this one's like an MIT license or an Apache license or what have you. So I'm going to demo that to you briefly. So now, if, for example, what I want to do is I want to implement, if I can type correctly, implement a function to create a DynamoDB table. And maybe I'll call that, oh, look, it's suggesting some text already, but maybe I'll call this one create Dynamo table, and it should autocomplete at this point. So maybe I have to trigger it. You know, I think part of the problem might be that I've got too many live feeds going all over the show. And the live demo fails. Here we go. Okay, it works after all. So it's suggesting a couple of code options here. And it's telling me that it's got the reference code is under the MIT license. And I can go into the CodeWhisperer reference log and have a look at that. So that should show down here. Now I'll if I press my Option C to re-trigger that, as you can see, it's fiddly. There we go. All right, so it should update down the bottom. Doesn't always do it, but I should be able to cycle through it. Now, if I press the left and right key on my keyboard here, I can see different options for where the code might come from. So for example, this one here is Apache 2.0 license, and this one is an MIT license. So that's kind of interesting. Now, if I go and say, I like this one here, and I'm okay with the MIT license. So to then go and sort of print the code on the screen, what I do is I then press tab. So I press tab, and once I've pressed tab, it goes and says, you have accepted this recommendation with this particular code. Here's the code that essentially the line that was copied, and it came from this particular repository. And it is a to-do list serverless repository. Now, it's kind of not really all that much different to copy pasting code after you've Googled it, which of course we're all doing, and that's kind of how coding works these days. So this is just kind of like, I guess, shortcutting that whole process. Okay, so that shows you how to do the reference log. In a way, this is a copy paste sort of thing, but most of the code you'll find is actually generated like from scratch rather than wholeheartedly copy pasted from another repository. Okay, so actually what I was going to show you was how this auto generates code. So you've got a comment here, generate me a function to get a file from a URL. So what I might type into there is say definitely get file from URL, and then it auto completes, and you can see it's making me a suggestion straight away through the auto suggestion one, and I can just go and tab complete it by just saying, oh cool, I like that one, that's pretty good. But actually maybe I want some error correction in here, like some error handling. So I was saying to say with error handling, and then I trigger this one again, and now I get it with error handling. So that's pretty cool. So just by changing the comment, it goes and changes the code underneath it. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip the rest of this, but I wanted to make sure that you saw what this looks like. Okay, let's move over to GitHub CoPilot. So to make GitHub CoPilot, now you saw in VS Code, I've got GitHub CoPilot installed, but actually GitHub CoPilot released this really cool feature, which is a chat integration, which is kind of like ChatGPT, but brought into the VS Code environment. But to get access to that, you got to fill out a form, and you go onto some sort of like pre-release thing a couple of weeks after I filled out the form. I actually filled it out like months ago. I got access to the pre-release, but to make the pre-release work, you have to use something called VS Code Insiders, which gives you access to all of the kind of like the pre-release stuff. So to make CoPilot work, you go to extensions and you go and install the CoPilot plugin, CoPilot, and grab the GitHub CoPilot chat. And I want to show you how the chat works, because to me, the chat is a bit of a game changer. Okay, cool. So these are the two extensions that you have to install. So then that gives you this one down here, this extra panel. Let me clear this one. All right, so now again, to make this work, I'm going to drag this over here. And I'm sorry, the text is a bit small, Getika. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger, but I don't think I can make it much bigger than this. Hopefully this is kind of coming through. Okay, so I've got my file explorer on this side. I've got a whole chat set up over here, and I can ask it anything about any kind of coding help that I might want. So for example, maybe we want to build a serverless API. So I might say, I want to build an AWS serverless API. Can you get me started? All right, let's see what it does. Sure. What programming language would you like to use for your AWS Service API? This is pretty cool because there's been like so much, discussion around prompt engineering and everything. And screw the prompt engineering. It's actually just a human chat interaction. So, what programming language? Okay. What should we go with? Let's go with TypeScript. We'll go with that one. Great choice. How about that? Okay, so it's making a whole bunch of recommendations. It has said, great choice. Here are the steps to get started with building an AWS Serverless API using TypeScript. Install the AWS CLI, da-di-da, create a new serverless service with the create command of the serverless framework. I don't want to use the serverless framework. That's no good. I don't want that. So I'm going to say I want to use, I want to use AWS SAM instead. Sure thing. It's a friendly. It's almost like polite, actually. So it says, sure thing. Here are the steps to get you started with building an AWS Service API using TypeScript and AWS SAM. So now it's pretty cool. This is looking much better. So it says run some init command, da-di-da-di-da, gives us an example template we can use, and some code that gets us started on a hello world, looks like a Lambda function. So, but actually, I think I need the actual codes, right? So I might say, what are the SAM CLI commands to build a serverless API using TypeScript? Okay, so this is looking good. So it's actually told me I need to do a SAM init, SAM build, SAM deploy. It has given me the actual commands to run to get the whole thing going, exactly what I got to do. It says create this hello TS. The hello TS is actually this one up here, right? So I can copy that. So following these instructions, I should be able to get the whole thing going without ever browsing to the documentation. So I reckon this is quite a game changer, and I think this is going to essentially become the new norm. Now, very quickly, I want to show you a couple of more features, and then we'll be done here. So a couple of cool stuff that you can do is if you, for example, if I'm looking at the security scan demo, and I'm looking at this code right here, and I find this code's a little bit like, I'm confused. There's just a lot happening there. So maybe all I want to do is do /explain. And if I press explain enter, it's going to tell me what this code is actually doing. So that's pretty cool. I'm not going to read all that, don't worry, but you could, if you wanted to learn what a really complicated piece of code is doing, then there you can go and do that. Now I'm going to clear the console, and I'm going to really quickly do one more thing. So I want to ask it to write a simple application that analyzes the sentiment of a given text using Python using AWS CDK commands to create the project. Okay, so I'm asking it to build a Python, some Python code that's going to analyze the sentiment of any given text, and I want to create the project using AWS CDK. And it's squirting out a whole bunch of code. And now you might feel that this all looks correct, but it turns out that you might actually not be right. And I want to just point out to you that if you this is actually, you can't run this code. It won't work, and it doesn't follow any kind of good practices. There's commands that are missing. So while it looks like it's incredibly well structured, it's actually completely flawed. For example, when you do a CDK init here, the next thing that you do is you pip install. You don't actually do it this way. What you do is you activate the Python environment, and then you do a pip install requirements text. So you would not install it this way, right? Activate the Python environment, run the requirements text. That's how you would do that. It's given us some CDK code right here. Now, this CDK code is actually also completely broken and would completely not run. Core is actually something that doesn't exist. So the stack actually comes out of directly from AWS CDK. This construct here actually comes from a constructs library, so that definitely wouldn't work. And I noticed that this code is actually completely different to the code that it generated me yesterday when I went through and did this demo in prep for today. And it had, for example, this from asset was just asset. So that would have failed as well. So none of this works. So kind of interesting. And so it can generate you a lot of code, but maybe this is actually the killer feature of that CodeWhisperer could do much better at, which is generate Amazon or AWS specific code that is actually going to work rather than code like this, which, well, it looks like CDK code, but it definitely wouldn't work because it's full of bugs. Okay, cool. So let's go back to our presentation and close out. Okay. Sorry, I minimized the window and now I need to get back. I think it's this one, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. Okay, cool. So present window, that one. Okay, it's showing on both presentations. All right, cool. So back to this now. I was looking for some memes to show. A presentation should always have some really cool memes. Days before OpenAI, which we had ChatGPT as kind of like a big call out in the word cloud. In the past, the developer would code for 2 hours and they would then debug for 6 hours. Now you code for 5 minutes, but you debug for 24 hours. So remember, we had all this optimism at the beginning, and I just showed you how broken the code, that's the CDK code that CoPilot generated for us was. You might actually, if you're new to CDK and you maybe haven't done a lot of CDK in the past, then maybe this 24 hours could be quite real actually. So something to certainly be aware of. Okay, so just briefly, what are these tools used for? Writing code, debugging, getting help, documenting code, learning about the code base. I showed you the /explain command, testing code. There's a separate one /test, and it will generate you a unit test straight off code that you've just highlighted. So some pretty cool stuff is out there. Couldn't show you everything, but these tools are so feature rich. It's pretty fascinating what they can do. Here's some things that I have done really successfully with ChatGPT. And I found that ChatGPT code is actually better than what we just saw generated by CoPilot, although I always thought that they were using the same backend since it's all kind of OpenAI. But so yeah, I've used it to generate CDK code, CloudFormation code, SAM, CLI instructions, AWS CLI commands. That one is a killer feature, by the way. Some of the AWS CLI commands, like if you get into like the filters and the parameters and getting that formatting right, like if you're saying, out of this massive JSON structure that you get back from, say, listing all of the S3 buckets in an account, right? So huge. And now I want to filter it to a specific one. Getting the syntax right is really tricky, but it turns out ChatGPT is incredibly good at giving you exactly the right CLI command. Yeah, cool. So that's kind of where it's at. I had some closing sort of major trends. I might skip those for now just because I've kind of run out of time and we've been going for an hour. So yeah, I mean, the sort of like Q&A session, I'm going to see how this works. So we've got this So in theory, I should be able to find the Ask Me Anything section. Oh, we've got a couple. None of them have got votes. What do you think of a developer writing perfect code without understanding what AI? Oh, okay, votes are coming in. I'll do that one anyway. What do you think of a developer writing perfect code without understanding what AI wrote for them? Well, I guess my first thought is that developers don't write perfect code. So therefore, that's probably not realistic for us to write perfect code. And I think it's actually very real that the code that the AI generates, a lot of it we probably won't understand. And so the way I reflect on it is that the barrier to entry gets lowered. And so as in you do not need huge amount of skills to actually code some possibly quite advanced software. And that in itself can probably introduce a heck of a lot of bugs because the individuals just don't know necessarily what they're doing. And so I think we're probably going to see a huge amount of sloppy code coming through. And that sloppy code actually becomes the input to the next the next model training phase. So what you have is AI generating sloppy code, and that AI being fed into the training model for the next, big training model code generation release. And what that's actually called, there's a really cool phrase that comes to mind now, which is the mad cow disease of AI, where AI is eating its own output. Because that's where the mad cow disease was, when we fed the cows to the cows, and obviously that's an incredibly bad idea to do. And there's been models and studies done to show how AI being trained on the output of itself leads to a very unstable AI algorithm. Now, what unstable means, I'm not quite sure, but certainly it's a period of interesting challenge. Okay, so let me have a look at maybe another one or two, and then maybe we're at limit. I'll let you guide me on that. In this era where AI technology is rapidly advancing, what technology do you think developers need to invest time in to survive? Also, what skills do you think developers do you think developers need to have to handle AI? This is a really good question. So I think we can safely assume that AI is going to, as in AI services, are going to be released at an ever more rapid pace. And not only is it that there's going to be, the whole AI tooling space being advancing, but AI is going to, and largely is already massively dominating our everyday lives. So that's happening already. I think that there's going to be a huge amount of services that are just easily consumable by by just calling out API. So I think you don't have to be like a hardcore statistician or mathematician or even understand model training and model generation. I think the tools are getting so much better that essentially the barrier of entry gets reduced continuously. But just the sheer volume coming through is going to be a challenge. And I think the hard one to survive on that one is to know what to look at, where to search. And I think that's where I think we as humans need to stay connected and not lose ourselves when we're communicating with an AI, and make sure that we communicate with humans. We need to communicate more with humans than we communicate with AI. Hopefully that makes sense. But I believe that's the best way to survive in this AI-driven world that we're facing. What skills do you think developers need to have to handle? I think there's vocabulary that we all should learn. I think we should understand what it means to have model inference, what it means to have model training, what are the different training methods, what are the different machine learning model strategies, algorithms that are out there. I think we need to learn those as developers, but it doesn't mean that we have to understand them at huge amount of depth. Hopefully that kind of helps. All right, Kamarka has answered. See, it's the first time I've using this one. Okay, here's one more upvote and then I'll be done. Do the copilots have access to the latest data? For example, the latest library documentation seems like a crucial feature. Yeah, this one's also a really good one. So if you've used ChatGPT in the past, then it'll tell you, like if you ask it about a modern event, like something that happened recently, it'll tell you, sorry, my data has been cut off on this particular day, and that is when model generation or model training happened, and that was the data set that was fed in, and that's why essentially the knowledge stops at that point. And so my understanding is that that is how this is trained. So they don't tell us how far back it goes. I don't think that they necessarily release that information. But what you'll find with like companies like Tab9 is that they are being way more transparent than what we've seen with AWS and Microsoft, right? So like OpenAI is incredibly closed. For a company that used to be open, it's surprisingly closed. And what we're seeing with Tab9 is that they fully disclose all of the um, all of the code that they have trained their models on. And I think we're going to see way more of that. And if we're seeing a lot more transparency, then we're probably also going to see a lot more open source models come out. And I think that is the big kind of shift that's gonna happen. So yeah, anyway, those are some of the thoughts. I reckon maybe last sort of closing statement is I think Hugging Face is going to be like massively central to this shift that we're going to see towards much more open source community models. Cool. Well, hey, it's been a pleasure. I hadn't actually quite figured out how to do the. Oh yes, there was one thing that I wanted you all to do. So before we close out, so we have a post-event survey, and I really want you guys to please do the event survey. It's super important that we all learn what we can do better. There's a huge amount of effort that goes on behind the scenes to plan these kind of events and make it happen. So please, please, please do us the favor and fill out the survey, post-event survey. It'd be really awesome, much appreciated. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and take care. Until next time.